So we were both spurred by the Hoop Collective, ESPN's podcast, where it is anchored by Brian Windhorst, but our friend Tim McMahon ends up on it. Tim Bontemps also ended up on it on this broadcast or this particular episode. And one of the things that they were talking about in one section of the podcast was the Mavs, where they are, where they're building to, and a very particular comment that Kyrie Irving gave post-game to a question that Tim Bontemps asked after this game versus the Sixers. And I actually read this last night. And so we will enter another iteration of a segment on this show that I like to call reading. And I will try and limit this so I don't have to read the whole damn thing. But the part that was pertinent here, and we talked about the latter parts, which was kind of a different part. But here, quote, "I think just human nature, man. I'm getting traded to New York environment, and it's just a lot of newness. I'm trying to introduce myself to everybody, figure out, who do guys on the team go to confide in off the court, who is our coaching staff as people, upper management, who are they as people? What do they expect from me? The big question, why they traded for me, and what does it look like for the future? That's the big question. What does our future look like? What does our future look like?" And of course, then he starts talking about the prospects of the season, and that's when he uses the word cluster F, right? I'm censoring myself there clearly. But that portion of it was a very interesting one. The question of, why did they trade for me? What does our future look like? That is a question that Mavs fans everywhere are asking, and it really needs to be a question that the Mavs organization not only is asking, but has some idea of an answer for. Because we were talking earlier about somebody that texted in on the truckwreck.com text line, and I appreciate all the people that participate in this show. It really helps it become a much better show. They said that this team is one single off season away from starting a dynasty, right? And I think some of that is hyperbole, but the idea of you're a season away from being good is generally the idea. And I don't think that's true at all, right? And so with that being the case, what does your future look like, and how can you get there?
It's tough because depending on how in the immediate your season ends here, you could be having a top 10 pick in the NBA draft, or you could be conveying a pick to the New York Knicks, which will unlock finally your future in some ways by getting rid of the last remnant of the Kristaps Porzingis trade. If you decide not to convey the pick, then you still have to convey one at some point in either 2024 or in 2025. My point being is that the road to finding that contendership within the Western Conference starts and ends with signing Kyrie Irving, in my mind, this summer. And then being able to at least have some idea that going into next year, you can build the kind of continuity with Luka and Kyrie that you weren't really able to, given the injuries that both Kyrie and Luka were dealing with during the time that Kyrie came post All-Star break.
That's fine and dandy, right? Again, I've said multiple times on the show, I think that's what happens is that Kyrie returns. Okay. And that's not a given, right? And I don't want to make it seem like it's a given, because I think that's what's going to happen. And in fact, if you listen to this quote, right, if you go back to the quote that I just read off from Kyrie Irving, he doesn't seem all that certain as to where his future is, and also, right, to what they are expecting of him. Now, of course, like, the idea is that is what he's been probing at, and maybe he has come to some level of answer. Why they trade for him, and of course, like, in a larger sense, because they're desperate. We understand that. But like, yo, as an organization, you make this trade in order, obviously you need him and you anticipated the team would get better, but also this is a recruit from within. I likened it to when the Raptors in 2018-2019 traded for Kawhi Leonard. You traded for him with the hopes, obviously, that you'd have a good season, which they did, and they won a championship, but also that you would get him in-house and be able to have him see, this is the vision. This is what your life could be if you remain here. If you look at that perspective for what the Mavs have done, I have a good question as to, like, or I have a question as to what Kyrie looks at and says, this is my future if I remain with the Mavs.
At least from his comments, he sounds fairly comfortable here.
Okay.
Obviously, from the basketball side of things, it hasn't worked out the way that I believe he has wanted it to. But I think for Kyrie, one thing that's important, one thing I think we've come to learn about him during his stops is that he wants to be somewhere where he is respected and not necessarily tolerated. And those are words that he has used in the past as far as how he wants to be viewed within an organization. I think the Mavericks give him that opportunity to be viewed as a respected member of this group versus someone who is just tolerated. And that starts with the relationship with Kidd and Nico Harrison, and the one that he's growing, it appears, with Luka Doncic.
Okay, so we've got that, right? If Kyrie retains, you need everything else.
Yes.
You need defensive capable players. You need larger wings. You need better shooting, funny enough. Because you have shooting and you've built this team on being able to shoot the three, but you need shooting to be far more consistent than it is right now. And you also need shooters that do not wilt in certain moments. And I don't mean to be harsh about this. One of the things that was tough about that game against Philadelphia, they were leaving Maxi Kleber booty butt naked open. Because Kleber has had moments where you could tell there was self-doubt. And it's understandable in some ways, but that's not to be expected. Yeah, you can't really have that for the place that you want the Mavs to be, right? They need so many things. And the reason why I bring that up is you do not have cap space really to, functionally, you do not have enough cap space to make this all happen out of cap space or make really very much happen out of cap space. And you also don't have draft capital. So the tough thing about that is okay, well, you go into the offseason and you'll just make some moves. How? You don't have the tools. You don't have the avenues, at least not in my brain, right? I'm not no NBA executive. Maybe Nico Harrison and Mark Cuban and the brain trust there, Michael Finley, have more of an idea. But the way I'm looking at it, I don't see all of the avenues that you have to take the team that has the structural issues that it does from where it is all the way to the places that you want to get there, whether it's a season or even over multiple seasons. Because, again, you're going to be good enough to where your draft picks aren't going to be all that useful unless you go down in the tank, or if you lose games here at the end of the season, maybe you get a top 10 pick. And then that also hampers the other draft picks that you have and the opportunities that you have to make the team better. I think that you were between a rock and a hard place as an organization on how you get better. And as you mentioned earlier, you have 2 or 3 years to make this happen before that clock on your superstar starts to get really uncomfortable.
Yeah, and I think part of that is the reason why you saw some of the sense of urgency to try to make something happen during this season to go and acquire Kyrie Irving to at least get that started, because now you look at what this team needs, and we talked about some of this with respect to what's the best way to build around Luka Doncic and presumably Kyrie Irving going into the future. It starts, as you mentioned, 3-and-D wings, individuals that can guard,
which are quite literally the most desired thing in this league. It's not like you're going to get any of those for cheap.
Yes. And the example that I'll use, and you say, Kevin, this is a obvious example to use, but it gives you an idea of the kind of profile player that I think the Mavericks kind of need. A guy like a Jeremy Grant, for example, a guy who can defend on one end, can go get his own basket, can shoot the three pretty decently, and still be able to fit within an offense that can play different styles, whether it be the slow it down pace with a Luka Doncic or be able to get up and down the floor, with Kyrie
Jeremy
Irving.
Grant makes $20 million a year right now,
which low-key is kind of a bargain for what he brings. I mean, he's a good player. I like Jeremy Grant a lot as a player.
And so that's what the point I'm making there. That's not an easy piece to go get, and that's it's not like you get Jeremy Grant and it's finished.
No,
right?
Not at all.
And so that's you need backup guard play, because we've understood Jaden Hardy is not a point guard, and maybe we're gonna ride this out.
Yeah.
All right. Maybe that's the way you try and address that. Not really addressing it, but whatever. You end up with a singular Jeremy Grant somehow added to what you have. Somehow. I don't know how you make that happen, right? Because I don't think you have the avenue. But let's say you magically make that happen. How are you getting a bid? Hell. How are you getting off of Davis Bertans' contract?
Yeah. And low-key finding a way to maybe move off of JaVale McGee, because
all of those moves that you would like to maybe make, they also take capital to make happen. Those are not things that happen in a vacuum. Those are all things that you also need to put in some money to make the machine go. You don't have enough coins to play, to use a metaphor. And that's the scary portion about all the swings that they've taken, which I can honestly rationalize.
You can rationalize all of them. Yeah.
Right? In the moment, these are you needed to make the Kristaps Porzingis swing. You needed to try and upgrade your wings to try and go get Josh Richardson. You may have missed on that, right? We could start stacking all these up. Right? Made sense in the moment, made sense in the moment, made sense in the moment. The problem is you do enough of those at a time, there's always a time to pay back. The problem is right now, which is the time where you're like, all right, well, we need to try and recoup assets and maybe pay this back and maybe not be as good or what have you. You look up and you go, damn, we got Luka on 3 years remaining on his deal, probably 2 years to be able to continue to show him that you're capable of winning here. And those things do not jive.
I think for me, the biggest thing is, regardless of whether or not Kyrie Irving is back with this team next year, the one thing that has to be solved now, what is your identity going to be with either Luka by himself or with Luka and Kyrie going forward, and how does that inform you on what you want to build around those two? That's why I think it's so important that if they do bring Kyrie back, the first thing that they have to do is sit down with the two of them and say, what kind of team are we going to define ourselves to be, and what does that look like surrounding the two of you when you're on the floor at the same time? Because that, to me, is something that we have not found out yet in any type of confidence, is what does this team identity-wise look like with both of them on the floor at the same time, and how consistently can that be with those two on the floor together at the same time? So regardless of whether or not, Christian Wood is back, Dwight Powell, whomever, what's the identity of this team? Because I don't know if they have a true and good idea of what that is.
That's a valid question. And the point I'm making, KG, and this is a really sad one, regardless of whatever answer you come up with on this is the identity we want to have, I don't think you have the NBA currency to go and achieve it, right? It's like, yo, I want to remodel my house. What style would you like to? You know what? I was thinking maybe, mid-century. How much money you got? I got about $13. Right? I think that's the place that you're at as the Mavs. And of course, that is extreme. But that's the part that's really frustrating for me as I'm looking at it, because we all want this team to be good. It behooves us, right, for this team to be good. It's more fun to talk about all those things. I just don't see the avenue forward, and that's the scariest part.